She walked into the gym unnoticed. But when the black belt challenged her as a joke, no one expected what she would unleash. What happened next left the entire gym in stunned silence. This is her story. For more powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Simply Stories. The martial arts gym pulsed with energy. The sound of bodies colliding with mats, shouts of encouragement, and rhythmic slaps of feet against the floor filled the large space. Rows of punching bags lined the far wall, and mirrors reflected determined faces and swift, practiced movements. A group of students rotated through sparring drills in the center, while spectators and off-duty members leaned against benches, sipping water and exchanging casual commentary. Through the glass doors, she walked in quietly, unnoticed at first. The black woman wore a plain hoodie, black joggers, and sneakers. Her hair was tied back simply, her expression unreadable. There was no swagger, no dramatic entrance, nothing to suggest what was coming. She stood at the edge, observing the gym. With a calm, focused gaze, few people glanced at her, their looks brief and dismissive. One man nudged his friend and muttered something under his breath, smirking, the head instructor standing near the mat and overseeing sparring rotations. Looked over and raised an eyebrow at the newcomer. His tone carried amusement more than welcome when he called out, "Hey, maybe she wants to give it a try." Laughter rippled through the group. A young black belt, already flushed from a recent bout, grinned wide and waved. "I'll go easy on her," he said, chuckling. His friends nearby laughed louder, some clapping, others already pulling out their phones. It was the kind of teasing challenge that floated around gyms often, except this one came with a smug assumption. "Oh, expected much." She looked like someone who had wandered in on accident. Or maybe someone who thought cardio kickboxing counted as real training. Without a word, she pulled off her hoodie, revealing a fitted black athletic top. She slid off her sneakers, stepped onto the mat, and stood across from the black belt with quiet certainty. Her movements were fluid, confident but not flashy. She bowed slightly, her posture relaxed. No nerves, no bluster, no wide eyes scanning the room. One of the younger guys in the corner muttered, "This is going to be hilarious," then raised his phone a little higher. The black belt stretched his neck and rolled his shoulders, clearly still in performance mode. "Don't worry," he said loud enough for people to hear. "I'll make it quick." More laughter followed, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on him, steady and unreadable. The instructor gave a casual nod to begin, and the room quieted slightly. The first few moments were textbook sparring fare. He advanced slowly, throwing a soft jab with exaggerated showmanship. She stepped slightly to the side, just far enough that the jab cut air. Her feet barely made a sound. A few eyebrows rose. He smirked and tried again, this time a little faster. Another dodge. Then, without warning, she moved. Her legs swept forward low and fast, catching his foot just as he shifted his weight. He hit the mat hard. The thud echoed louder than it should have. Laughter stopped. No one spoke for a second. The black belt blinked in confusion, quickly scrambling to his feet. He grinned again, trying to play it off. "Lucky shot," he muttered, brushing dust from his uniform pants. She said nothing. She just resumed her stance as calmly as before. This time, his approach was less playful. He jabbed again, quicker, tighter. She parried it with a subtle twist of her wrist and countered with a clean strike to his shoulder, knocking him off balance. He stumbled back a step. The murmurs in the crowd shifted in tone. There were no cheers, but the atmosphere had changed. Phones were still up, but not for comedy anymore. He came forward again, now visibly irritated. His hands moved faster, his stance wider, but she adjusted instantly, meeting his movements with flawless control. Every time he lunged, she anticipated. Every strike, she evaded or redirected. And then, just as he overreached, she stepped inside his guard, hooked his arm, and spun him down with an effortless throw. The mat trembled beneath him. He slapped the floor in frustration, breathing heavily, sweat now visible on his brow. She didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She simply took a small step back and waited. The instructor, who had been watching more closely now, finally raised a hand. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharper than before. The black belt stayed on the mat for a moment longer before slowly getting to his feet. His face flushed not from exertion, but from something else. Embarrassment, confusion, maybe even respect. She bowed once more and stepped off the mat, walking past the row of wide-eyed students and stunned onlookers. The gym was still noisy with movement, but the tone had shifted. The laughter was gone. People whispered to each other, glancing her way as if trying to reprocess what they had just seen. No one knew who she was. But from the way she moved, calm, efficient, unstoppable, they knew she was nothing close to what they had assumed. And for the first time that evening, the gym wasn't filled with sound. It was filled with silence. He stepped forward, still wearing the same lazy smirk as before. His stance was casual, shoulders loose, hands raised just enough to play the part. The black belt bounced lightly on his feet, giving the impression that this was just a warm-up drill, something to stretch his legs and entertain the room. Around them, the gym buzzed with a low hum of chatter. People were still watching, still recording, but the laughter from earlier had dimmed. His trace of curiosity had replaced it. He threw the first jab a slow, almost theatrical punch, meant to test her reaction. His grin widened as he extended it lazily, expecting her to flinch, block, or react late. But she didn't. She moved not with panic or hesitation, but with silent precision. A simple sway of her upper body, just enough to let the jab pass. Her cheek without even grazing her. Her eyes never left his. Then she moved. Before anyone could register what happened, her legs swept in low and fast, a blur across the mat. The black belt's feet were taken from under him so cleanly that his body didn't even twist, he just dropped. Hard. The mat shook beneath his back, and the sound cracked through the gym like a mic drop. A gasp shot through the crowd, sharp and collective. A few people lowered their phones, blinking as if unsure they had just seen what they thought they saw. He blinked up at the ceiling, stunned. His smile was gone. He rolled to his side and stood, slower now. His movements had lost their bounce, replaced by carefulness. He brushed imaginary dust from his pants, as if trying to play it off as a slip, a momentary mistake. A few awkward chuckles came from the corner, but even those died quickly. Something about the way she stood there quiet, still breathing steady, told everyone watching that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They reset. He raised his hands again, this time tighter, higher. He shifted his feet into a real stance, now one rooted in actual technique. No jokes, no swagger. He charged with more intent, snapping a jab toward her midsection, then following with a right hook aimed at her temple, but she saw it coming. She didn't just dodge, she timed it. With her lead hand, she parried the jab, sidestepped the hook, and rotated on the balls of her feet. Before he could reset, her palm drove sharply into his shoulder. Turning his body with the impact and sending him stumbling off balance, he caught himself with a grunt, shooting her a brief glare, not of anger yet, but of recognition. For the first time, he looked at her like she was a real opponent. Around them, the tension shifted. A ripple passed through the onlookers. Phones were still up, but they weren't smiling anymore. The screens weren't for fun, they were for documentation. People had stopped pretending this was a light-hearted match. That the instructor leaned forward, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't say a word, but his expression had changed. He'd been watching with detachment before, like a teacher waiting to break up a joke gone too far. Now his attention was laser-focused. Like a coach analyzing footage of a fighter he should already know but doesn't, the black belt circled her cautiously. His breathing was louder now, his face tight. He lunged again, this time feinting. A low kick before springing upward with a spinning elbow, one of his signature moves, the kind that usually turned heads, but she didn't flinch. She stepped backward just enough to avoid the strike, then leaned in before his foot touched the ground. Her arms coiled around his own, twisting with practiced ease, guiding his momentum against him. In a blur of motion, he was on the ground again, but this time, she didn't just throw him, she locked him in. Her body dropped smoothly to one knee as she secured the pin, locking his right arm against his own shoulder. using nothing but angle, leverage, and the perfect distribution of her weight. It was clean, textbook, and completely inescapable. The kind of move only someone with hundreds of hours of live sparring would dare to execute mid-fight. The kind that left no room for brute strength to matter. For a second, he struggled kicking, lightly testing the hold, but it was no use. His free hand slapped the mat once, twice. Tap. Tap. The room went completely silent. She released him the moment he tapped, rising smoothly to her feet as he stayed on the ground, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling again, this time not from surprise, but from disbelief. Around the mat, no one spoke. The usual post-fight. Banter was gone. No one clapped, no one laughed. The entire gym had paused, frozen in a moment that felt too heavy to break. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't gloat or make eye contact with anyone. She simply adjusted the hem of her shirt and stepped away, walking calmly to the edge of the mat, like nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. But something had. Everyone in that gym knew it. The cocky black belt who moments ago had been so eager to go easy on her was still sitting on the mat, head down, elbows on his knees. His breathing was steadying, but his pride had taken a sharper hit than his body. The phones had stopped recording, not because the moment was over, but because everyone watching understood they had just witnessed something real, something serious. The instructor finally looked around, his jaw tight. He didn't say anything, not yet. But it was clear to everyone present, this woman was not who they thought she was, and no one dared to ask. What came next? The room stayed silent long after she stepped off the mat. No one said a word, not even the instructor. She moved with the same steady pace, her breath even, her expression unreadable, like none of it had meant anything, like it was just another round, just another day. But the people around her knew. Better. The weight of what they'd seen clung to the air like humidity. The cocky confidence that had filled the gym an hour ago had vanished, placed by something else quiet, uncertain, and curious. She picked up her hoodie from the bench and began slipping it back on. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, as if rehearsed. It's a kind of ease that only came from years of discipline. Still no one spoke. It was the head instructor who finally took a slow step forward. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before, missing its earlier amusement. He didn't crack a joke this time. He didn't offer a handshake or give her a pat on the back. He just looked at her. Ali looked in, asked the question everyone else was thinking, but too unsure to speak aloud. Where did you train? Didn't answer immediately. She pulled the hoodie halfway over her shoulders, then paused. Her eyes met his briefly. Not cold, not distant, just ... still. Then she gave the smallest nod and said, almost as an afterthought, a long time ago. The words hung there, empty of detail, but full of suggestion. Right. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't a brag. It was a line that could have meant anything. Coming from her after what they'd seen, it said everything. That's when the whispers started. Not loud, not frantic, but steady. Names were tossed around. Gyms, dojos, tournaments. Phones came. Out again, not to record, but to search. A couple of younger students typed quickly, scrolling through images and videos, comparing faces. Someone murmured, "She's gotta be someone," and the others nodded without looking up. One assistant instructor, someone who had only been teaching for a year or two, froze in place, staring at nothing. His brow furrowed and he whispered something to himself. Then he walked over to the head instructor and leaned in. She used a variation of that internal shift throw, he said, voice low. We don't even teach that here. I've only ever seen it in competition footage. Advanced black belt level. Maybe even higher. The head instructor didn't respond right away. He just kept his eyes on her. Slowly his arms dropped from the cross position across his chest. A hint of respect began to settle into his posture. His face was unreadable. But there was a shift, like someone realizing they had underestimated a storm right before it made landfall. The black belt she'd just humbled remained near the mat. He had taken his time getting up, and now he stood, a few feet away from her, breathing deeply, arms loose at his sides. The smugness he'd worn before was gone. It had been stripped off him as completely as if it were part of his uniform. He wasn't angry, wasn't defensive, just quiet. Humbled, he walked up slowly, no theatrics. When he stopped in front of her, there was no eye-rolling, no fake grin. He bowed, a real, deliberate bowed, being respectful. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," he said. His voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. He wasn't just apologizing for underestimating her skill. He was apologizing for the way he and everyone else had looked at her when she first walked in, like she didn't belong, like she was a joke. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she offered the smallest, polite smile, not triumphant, just kind. She nodded, accepting the apology without words, and that was that. She turned back toward the locker area, leaving behind a room that felt entirely different from the one she had entered. Whispers continued to follow her as she walked. Even those who weren't trying to speak were whispering with their eyes. People began piecing together a story without having all the facts. Someone remembered seeing an old tournament video from years ago, grainy footage of a fighter who moved just like her. Another mentioned hearing about a woman who had once been a contender in the international circuit and disappeared without a trace. There were no photos, no solid leads, it's just theories. And maybe that was the point. Whatever her past was, she wasn't there for recognition. She hadn't walked in wearing a branded GI or championship patches. She didn't brag, didn't correct anyone when they laughed at her. She had shown up, watched quietly, waited until someone tested her, then answered in the language they understood best. The language of skill, the language of precision, the language of silence. And in doing so, she had flipped the entire dynamic of the gym upside down. No loud speeches, no declarations, just perfect control, executed at the exact moment she needed it. The most impressive thing wasn't that she won, it was how she made it look. Effortless. In a place where dominance was often measured by noise, speed, or muscle, she had delivered her statement with none of those things. Her presence alone rewrote the hierarchy of that room. Long after she had disappeared into the locker room, the questions continued. People asked the instructor if he knew her. He didn't. Others asked the assistant coach if she'd ever trained there before. She hadn't. One guy insisted they try to find footage of her online, but every search came up empty. Whatever her the story was, it wasn't one easily found on the internet. It lived in muscle memory. In the details of her footwork, in the decisions she made under pressure. It lived in the way she never once lost her composure, even as a room full of strangers underestimated her. That kind of story couldn't be Googled. It had to be witnessed. And now, everyone in that gym was part of it, whether they knew her. Name or not, she had just finished drying her hands when the head instructor approached her quietly in the hallway. Outside the locker rooms, the gym had settled into its usual rhythm again, pads striking, its music humming faintly in the background, but the tone was unmistakably different now. He didn't carry the playful air he'd worn earlier. Gone was the teasing humor. His shoulders were squared, his expression sincere. "Can I ask you something?" he said, stopping a few feet away. She turned toward him, silent. He didn't wait for an answer. "Would you ever consider teaching a class here?" There was no flattery in his voice, only respect. "The way you moved. That's not something we see every day," he added. He seemed to search her face for something interest. Curiosity, even refusal, but her expression remained calm, not cold, just unreadable. She said nothing right away. Her fingers absently pulled at the cuff of her sleeve. Her gaze drifted back toward the main mat. Through the doorway, she could see them, the younger students. A cluster of little girls giggling as they fumbled through their warm-ups. Their forms were sloppy, their balance off, but their faces lit up with each attempt. They moved like they didn't know yet that the world would someday ask them to prove themselves twice as hard. She watched them for a moment, her jaw tightening, just slightly, and something behind her eyes softened. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady. "Maybe," she said. And that was all. 1 week passed. The gym looked the same, but the air inside carried a subtle anticipation. News traveled fast, not in formal announcements or flyers on the wall, but in whispers and eager glances. People asked if she was really coming back. Some didn't believe it, others waited like kids before a storm, not sure what to expect, but certain they'd remember it. The class was scheduled for the beginner group, open to anyone willing to learn. No belts required. When she walked through the doors this time, heads turned immediately. No one ignored her now. Cocky jokes had vanished, replaced by quiet nods, and the kind of glances reserved for someone who had earned their place without ever asking for it. She moved with the same calm precision, but there was something different now, an anchor in her presence. She wasn't just passing through, she belonged. On the mat, the students lined up quickly. Some of them were girls from the previous week, their faces shining with nervous excitement. A few older members stood in the back, quietly curious, some trying to mask their eagerness by pretending they were just observing, but all eyes were on her. And then, from the opposite end of the room, appeared the same black belt who had once laughed, who had promised to go easy on her. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, no grin this time, no bravado. He stepped forward, bowed deeply, and then took his place quietly at the end of the row, like any other student. Not one word passed between them. He simply lowered his head, and she gave the smallest nod in return. She stepped onto the mat barefoot, paused, and looked across the room. For a moment, there was silence, utter stillness, like the gym was holding its breath. Then she raised her hand and gestured for the class to begin. She started with the basics. Not because she thought they couldn't handle more, but because she understood exactly how much power lived in the fundamentals. Every movement had purpose. She didn't waste time with dramatic speeches or overcomplicated drills. She demonstrated slowly, patiently, inviting them to notice details: the placement of feet, the angle of the hips, the moment just before impact. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly. This art isn't about how loud you hit, it's about how well you see. The students listened with wide eyes, following her every step. She corrected gently, without condescension. When someone struggled, she didn't rush. She repeated the motion beside them, over and over, until their bodies understood. And when one of the younger girls tripped mid-kick and fell forward, the room went silent. But before anyone could react, she crouched beside the girl, offering a hand not just to help her up, but to steady her. Falling is part of learning, she said quietly. What matters is what you do after. The girl nodded, eyes bright, and stood again. Quiet cheer rippled through the class. That day, something shifted in the gym, not just in structure, but in spirit. People who once watched her like an outsider, now watched like students. The black belt who had once underestimated her mirrored her stances, carefully imitating the same footwork he'd dismissed just days earlier. The instructor who had first pointed to her as a joke now stood quietly at the edge of the room. Arms crossed, a small, respectful smile on his face. The class ended not with applause or fanfare, but with bows exchanged all around, sincere, unified, and wordless. She stood at the front, looking at the faces in front of her, and for the first time since she walked into that gym, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. She was the teacher, as the students filtered out, chatting softly and energized. By what they'd learned, the head instructor approached her again. He didn't offer more praise, simply extended his hand, and when she shook it, he nodded once, as if something had finally been set right. She remained on the mat for a few more minutes after the others left, kneeling down to straighten a few items, adjusting a bag that had been left behind. Her gaze moved across the room, not searching, just observing. The mirrors reflected her quietly, no longer a visitor or a mystery, but something more. She didn't need recognition to hold space, she already did. And then the room faded into stillness.
Ouch.
No shouts, no pounding feet, no phones in the air. Just the faint hum of the lights and the soft breath of someone who had nothing to prove anymore. Because sometimes, strength doesn't enter the room with noise. Sometimes it enters quietly, moves with precision, listens more than it speaks. And when it finally reveals itself, there's no need for explanation, just silence. Never assume someone's limits based on what you see. Strength isn't always loud, but when it shows up, it commands silence.